Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the Energy Press. Already, Mr. Tsalemis has talked about the state of play in our country in terms of energy storage, but it's important to stress the fact that within a year, and I'm saying a year because this is around the time of the year that is an anniversary for a big boom in our country in terms of energy storage. We had the first projects with batteries last year. We have gone a long way in terms of legislation, but the degree of understanding of the question that is storage has we have done a lot to that. We do know what storage means, what it means to combine it with RES, what it means for the RES, how we can license such projects. There are many views, perhaps they don't all coincide, but there's also some maturity, so we can actually see the law, the legislative framework following. We also have answer the questions about what it means to have have storage participate in the market. Last year, we knew very little about that. We also have projects, candidate projects. That's very important. We have a lot more, perhaps, than we actually need. We have 15,000 of megawatts regarding storage plants. That's very different than the situation we had a year ago. We have support schemes, sustainability for these investments, and these are rather mature, I would say, and at a stage that has progressed a lot in terms of the negotiation with the European Commission. So we can tell that we will have support mechanisms for this energy storage projects that will allow the implementation of investments that will be ensured against the uncertainty that typifies such long-term projects. It's important to know that such a project will be financed based on studies and forecasts. If those support schemes are to proceed, this degree of uncertainty will be eliminated to a great extent. I would say that perhaps the weakest link in this chain of preconditions in order to ensure that projects are implemented on time is the matter of the access to the grid in connection to the saturation problems or saturation phenomena that our grid is facing. And it's critical to provide an answer for two reasons. First, because there are tenders, eminent tenders that have specific deadlines for the RF that, as per the ministry, we will have these tenders taking place within 2022. So that calls for an immediate need for a significant number of projects so that there is competition in those tenders. And these are, it's reasonable to expect that they will be actually implemented. But this cannot we cannot only work with the saturated grid as it is. We have to develop parts that are to be saturated or are close to being saturated. So this is important to have storage plants there, facilities that will be able to help decongest the grid. So we can increase the usage of RES in those areas. These are not easy problems to solve. And how to prioritize storage in relation to RES and access to the grid is a critical question at this time. In order to promote storage projects and perhaps decongest the saturated grids, we need to clarify that storage is not in competition with RES. What does that mean? It means that in a grid that is saturated due to increased production of RES, it's not rational to have a storage plant also providing energy. So we need to ensure with the right operating limitations that this does not happen. So in cooperation with the operators, we have to establish the right limitations, dynamic or static, that will ensure this operability. And that will make it possible to install plants in saturated areas. The second thing is, after these plants are there, we need to establish a mechanism that these plants will be able to provide services for decongestion. So they need not make congestion worse, but actually alleviate it. So we need absorption of energy when we have an export congestion. So these are things that it's easy to say and easy to understand as a concept, but it's very difficult to implement them. We have a large number of studies, of original studies, that need to be prepared and finalized. We have to find which are the areas of the grid that are saturated. We need to understand which are the limits for RES, which are the limits, what is the margin for installing storage plants, and how much additional margin could be created under these limitations, how the decongestion services will be paid, what is the cost-benefit ratio, because decongestion may come through storage, but not the only way you can achieve it. There are other projects as well, and we need to find the best way to do it. We have to quantify all these things, and we need to find a way to correlate these issues with the way the projects acquire access and how that reflects on the pricing, how contracts are being signed, and how this operability can be combined with the operation of the projects in the market. That's a very complex network of requirements and studies that we need to clarify in a manner of months, perhaps. If you were to ask me, I would say that the first thing is to ensure the priority access to storage for the grid. Otherwise, there won't be any projects for the tenders. And after we ensure that in the saturated areas, we need to develop the framework for providing decongestion services. Lastly, I want to say that this discussion about the access to the grid does not only involve storage. It's a question equally important and perhaps even more intense for RES, and there are equal questions there. And there are also specific suggestions, proposals that are included in the findings of the work of the storage team. And just to give you an example, we need to differentiate the maximum power of the plants based not on the installed power of the RES plants, but based, but also in saturated areas. This cannot be in the hands of the producer only. The maximum power must always be less than the installed power, so that we ensure that the megawatts, the margin megawatts, are being used to the best degree possible for the management of RES energy. Thirdly, this obligation to reduce the maximum power below the installed power and the stated power from the producer must be recognized as the ability to provide access to storage plants that can desynchronize the production to different times of the day, so that can actually use the availability of the network. there could be limitations, not 24/7 all around the year, but on certain periods of the day or the year where you have saturation. It's a very complex issue that has to do with how to best utilize the available margin. And on the side of the operators, there must be an effort to maximize this margin. For example, when the margin for receiving RES are determined by the resilience of the grid, for conditions that may occur only once every 5 years, it could be best if we can manage this overloading when this happens, instead of providing restrictions preemptively. That would liberate a great margin that we, of course, would need to utilize afterwards. I wanted most of all to convey the problem, our concerns. We all feel, all of us who work in storage, that the most immediate and difficult challenge is access to the grid. Perhaps it sounds ordinary, but that's one of the biggest problems. Thank you very much.